Lawyers of Reddit, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose and why?
Not quite, but I did a trial where I won and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present, so it left me feeling weird.
Oh yes, a high-maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit BC she was going to have to pay $60 per month in child support. She wanted a recalculation and I was praying she would have to pay more.
On the regular, honestly, if I wasn't rooting for my client to lose, corporate litigation mostly, never worked alone, by the time I was done working with them I considered it a small victory. This was a main reason I'm what they call a recovering attorney now.
Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of shit.
My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip: kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get, so my friend does some extra negotiating, and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted, I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries."
I worked at a civil firm and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant asshole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable shitholes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many, many people. Trying to defend this indefensible asshole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Edit: finding an excuse absolutely encompasses fabricating an excuse. Public defender. Definitely yes. Raped his own children. This post applies to several people I've defended.
Family lawyer here, associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts, crying face.
I'm a divorce attorney. There are several people I've represented who aren't dangerous but are pretty shitty parents. It's hard to help them fight for their kids without also fighting for them to be better parents. Fortunately, I live in a state where that kind of advice is allowed. Otherwise, I'd want many of my clients to lose.
Not really. If I for some reason can't stand someone, I'm not taking their case. Once I do represent someone, I begin to identify with his side and his version of the story. There's some psychological mechanism behind it, that once you take a position, you'll go to great lengths to justify this position both to yourself and to others. Don't know the English term for that. That's a bias you need to be aware of in order to calculate the risk for your client, because you tend to overestimate your chances of winning a dispute lawsuit once you found arguments for the case.
Not me, but my mom had this case like 6 years ago where she had to defend a man who killed his ex-girlfriend's 1-day-old baby. I remember my mom would come home every day and just cry. She's had a lot of cases where horrible things happen to kids and she's always been so afraid something would happen to my brother or me. It really took a toll on her.
A serial killer murdered a locally famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his murder, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years. The client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They are both on the title. They split up and she leaves a property that is literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a God, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with that is worth $600K might be hers because a serial killer murdered the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case.
Not a lawyer, but I used to be a Lyft driver and drove a group of lawyers to a strip club once. One of them told me about a case he did earlier in the year. The guy was on trial for murder and rape. The dude was apparently crazy as fuck and nobody doubted he was guilty. He was actually chained to a chair with a mask on. Hannibal Lecter style. His job was to try to get him off. He said he would try his hardest to get him to walk, but prayed to whatever God was listening, that he would fucking lose. The guy got life with no chance of parole. He was relieved, but then switched to a different law firm.
All the time. I do family and criminal law. Custody cases are the worst because an intense one means at least one of the parents isn't actually concerned about the well-being of the child. They just want to win. I will always represent my client and their interests, but it is certainly difficult some days.
Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction. To save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases I am rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. You win some, you lose some, or if client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or, in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where client has unreasonable demands or expectations and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an asshole.
I'm an intern at a PD's office. You get these kinds of cases a lot. There are asshole clients who lie to their attorneys, disobey very clear and simple instructions, get mad and demand Nelson hearings or file frivolous complaints with the bar. Then there's clients who are nice enough, but are clearly guilty and a danger to everyone around them. Trigger-happy armed robbers, sexual predators, etc. The PDs fight like hell for these clients, as they should, but they also sleep just fine when they're found guilty and get put away. There's a dude I'm doing work for currently who's looking at an anywhere from 25 years to life without parole, and while I'm gonna do my best to make sure his discovery is in order so he can get the fair trial he deserves, I fully expect him to rot and am not terribly sad about it.
I take appointments representing complete shitbag parents who lose their kids to DCS. The system in my state is really set up to help these people, but almost always they're awful and the kids deserve better. Not always, but so often it's really demoralizing sometimes.
Immigration attorney had a client sign up after having his visa cancelled as he was convicted for molesting his ex-partner's kid. I wasn't in a position in my firm to refuse clients because I'm a junior and senior attorneys would go nuts. We had multiple risk assessments since his offending, saying he was the lowest of low risk and testimony that he wasn't a pedophile. Got his visa back for him. Still don't know how I feel about it. I didn't want him to lose the case per se, I just wasn't expecting it to be successful.
Defense attorney. Mix of retained clients and contract work with the State Public Defender's Office when they have conflicts, all the time. Child sex defense, where the evidence is overwhelming and the client wants a trial. Sometimes they want a trial because they are psychopaths, sometimes because they are so shamed they are in denial, and sometimes as a coping mechanism. It's easier to blame the victim, jury, cops, lawyers, and the judge than admit you fucked a child. My job isn't to like my client. Or to lie for them. It's to be the gatekeeper. If the state wants a human to die in prison, then they have to follow the law. The need to legally present their evidence, follow the rules of evidence, and prove every element of every offense, no matter the guilt of my client. Fuck 'em if they don't prove their case. They have detectives, their own investigators, technology before trial, i.e. Celebrite and crime labs, technology at trial, smart boards, experts, etc., friendly former prosecutors as judges, material witness warrants, second chairs, law clerks, and public perception on their side.
All the fucking time. Family law is awful.
I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for meth possession. They were slam dunks. Guy got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because that is a fucking insane amount of prison time for a small amount of meth. B. He was a vet who was injured in combat, and C. He was relatively young and had to use a colostomy bag. My asshole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified. BC. I wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total. BC. The judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my office for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. Yeah, sometimes. I get patents for clients. Sometimes, I feel like the client has no business getting this particular patent.
I represented a company when there was infighting among the partners. A few of the partners came to me with a plan to buy out another partner. However, this plan was essentially a way to fuck this person over. I'm not sure if they thought I wasn't smart enough to figure it out, but when I called them out on it, they owned it and said that their plan was to dupe him into taking an offer and then screwing him. I pushed for an amicable resolution, i.e., a fair deal, and they went along with that for a while. The partner they were trying to buy out was not willing to leave without negotiating, and my clients didn't want to hang around. They fired me and are now with someone else. I know the attorney they went to, and I can't imagine they're crossing the unethical line I wouldn't cross. The sad thing is that I really respected these folks, but they clearly did not have any respect for me or their partner. It was gross.
Fresh out of law school, I was working as a public defender. My guy was an unrepentant DUI who made the roads more dangerous for all of us. He got into a non-injury accident and the police took over an hour to arrive. The prosecutors called well-meaning but incredibly stupid people as witnesses. I gave my guy the best defense I could by making the witnesses look confused and at fault, and by suggesting that it was possible that my guy was so stressed out by the accident that he started drinking after the fact to calm his nerves. He didn't testify himself, and there was no way to prove he was drinking before the accident. He got off, and about a month later, I quit.
Criminal lawyer in the UK. I once defended a guy who killed his own newborn child because it was crying so much. Literally hurled the child against the wall. At the time I had recently become a father too. I wanted that guy to do serious time. The jury convicted him of murder and he got a 14-year custodial sentence. I found it really hard not to celebrate almost identical set of facts in a 1998 case RV Wallin 19982 AC 82. It's worth a read if you ever feel like you might be a piece of shit. This will make you feel much better about yourself by way of comparison.
Not an attorney, but I work for a state's county court judge. As a clerk, I meet so many people, and unfortunately there are people who you start to recognize. We have some defendants who have 2, 3 and 4 cases. Needless to say, we are happy when they plead versus taking 2+ cases to trial. We also have defendants who are particularly needy, meaning non-compliant with pretrial supervision, picking up new cases, failing to appear, sovereign citizens, etc. While I really do try to stay impartial, it is hard to watch trials where people are blatantly guilty, so it's nice to see juries affirm that.
I worked for a firm that defended homeowners associations and primarily did default judgments against people who couldn't pay WA dues. I was a debt collector. I hope I lost all my cases. I quit that job after 3 weeks.
I've had to defend a hospital who didn't want to be held accountable for taking too long to admit a patient who died because of such delay. I was thrilled to see they lost, and disappointed to see how much they paid.
I represented a major automotive service company that upcharged unneeded products and services to an old car that they were not designed for. The products failed, killing 2 people and making a third an amputee, pushing company policy as a defense industry norm, and being instructed to degrade the moral character of the deceased was too much for me.
As a public defender, you often get clients that have racked up 6 separate complex cases plus a probation violation at once and insist on fighting every single one of them, not out of a sense of justice or innocence, just an attempt to make things as difficult as possible for the pigs. They will take up an inordinate amount of your time that could be focused on your other cases with actual merit. Don't get me wrong, they are entitled to a defense and I do everything I'm ethically obligated to do to defend, but when I get a client playing games with taking all their shit cases to trial, I do secretly hope their PO files a revocation on them for not reporting or using drugs on a charge carrying greater time than they're facing on the pending charges, as that usually convinces them to wrap up their bullshit cases as probation violations or summary hearings.
I was just watching the OJ trial on Court TV and always wondered how those lawyers could work for him, knowing 100% he brutally beat and murdered Nicole Simpson. Regardless of how much he paid, I just don't understand how they could live with themselves.
You should read The Lincoln Lawyer.
I had a client with a protective order against her ex-husband, and the guy wanted to come get his belongings with some deputies along to make sure he stayed out of trouble. The husband made the motion to go get his stuff and I was there to oppose it. It was so unreasonable to not rip the band-aid off and just part ways, but she insisted on making this as rough as possible for the guy. I won when the judge suggested a clever idea to make things work logistically but tediously for the parties, but I really felt for the guy. He just wanted to take his stuff and I had to be there to shoot him down.
Not a lawyer but a friend. ISHE was working a case against a well-known company for undercooking food and causing a family to get food poisoning. He had told me about how this family is known to the company he works for and tries to gain money from crazy things. This time he said they had a reasonable case. He went on to speak with the family and asked which company it was. The mother responded with one company while the dad responded with a completely different company name. My friend then went on to accidentally bring this up in court. TL. Dr. Family tries to sue well-known company, makes mistake, and lawyer accidentally brings up this mistake, causing them to lose.
Plaintiff's pie lawyer here. Can't say I've ever wanted to lose one. I've taken plenty that went sideways. But I've always managed to either withdraw from the representation early or resolve the case for something reasonable in light of changed circumstances. Plus I work on contingency, so taking BS cases is really bad business.
The look on Robert Kardashian's face when the verdict was read said it all.
Isn't this the type of question that a good lawyer would never answer?
I was a lawyer for criminals and most of the crimes were just stuff like stealing and some other petty crimes. But then there was this one guy who was convicted of killing his wife and 3 kids while drunk. Now all the evidence was stacked against him and he would come in to talk to me while he was so drunk. What he was saying was rubbish. He was also an absolute asshole and I really hope we would lose the case. He ended up getting 9 years in jail.